The Tomb Raider Core Designs Timeline. These are the first 6 games in the main Tomb Raider franchise. And I should hesitate. I shouldn't just leave it at games because there are actually 3 books that, quote, filled the gap between the ending shown in Chronicles and the beginning of Angel of Darkness. Now, in total, these 3 books are The Amulet of Power, The Lost Cult, and The Man of Bronze. Now, this was the first timeline of Tomb Raider games, and dated back to the first game when it debuted and later got ported to other systems. If you're unfamiliar with the backstory of this is how this timeline basically worked. Now, Lara Croft was indeed an heiress. She was the daughter of Lord and Lady Croft. But neither in this timeline had an interest in archaeology. And Laura started this lifestyle after surviving an accident, a plane accident. She actually found she enjoyed the lifestyle of, you know, surviving and all that. I mean, she did have an interest in archaeology, and her family knew connections, as is hinted at in the fourth game, at the beginning of the fourth game. So obviously, they'd humor her, hoping she'd grow out of it. But she never did. But they basically disowned her in this timeline. Now, this is the kind of stuff that made Laura a tougher person, more independent, and more of a badass. And for the most part, a lot of these games were very straightforward. You didn't have to worry about doubling back to an area. And it showed her as more kick butt. Sort of a sign of a little bit of the times in which these first few games were developed. And yes, they sort of played on her own initial sex appeal, too. And even for all these games and books, the story of her life was pretty much sequential. Although with some retellings. Well, the only thing is, I could come up with an excuse to answer some of the timeline problems that Chronicles put in there. But if I were to address these things in order, of course, they make a pretty good timeline. And all these titles, say for one, and maybe and game wise, but the books are actually were very fine reads. I've read them all. Uh, they are pretty much a mark for how popular Laura was and how much detail they were working on. So let's start with the basic beginning of how we were introduced to Lara Croft, and that was through the first Tomb Raider game, where it is shown she's established a name for herself. That she looks for this stuff, she hunts the stuff down, playing for sport, but in some ways she also knows that some of these things are so dangerous, and man is not ready to fully, appreciate or use them. And so, for one item, she is contacted while she is in Calcutta by Larson. And he is basically contacting her on behalf of Jacqueline Notla. Natla first offers to pay Laura, which Laura shows she really doesn't really need the money, just by saying I only play for sport. To which Natla says, "Okay, well, how about a big hunting ground, Peru, and there's this little item I'd like you to find, a relic. Does that have you interested?" To which Laura takes the offer and heads out. This shows, of course, that she is very badass, very independent. And so Laura basically takes on this deal, goes to Peru, and finds a lost city, a lost valley with dinosaurs, and the tomb of Tehokan, one of three Atlantean rulers, as well as part of something called the Skion or Skyon. Of course, once she finds it and leaves the tomb, she's attacked by Larson, who, well, he's not necessarily of the right mind. See, apparently he was to get it from Laura, possibly after killing her. But she beats him and gets him to spill the beans. She finds out that Natla has hired another person to get another piece of it, a gentleman named Pierre Dupont. So we see in a cutscene that Pierre, well, after Loris manages to sneak into Natla's office. I have to admit, the way she does this is beautifully done, which shows that she not only is appealing on the eyes, but she's a very smart person. As in, she cuts the wire, she blowtorches the wire, steel cable on an elevator, which causes the cable to pull her up while she's holding on to it. And she lets go, apparently right at the right time. to let the momentum continue pulling her up, and she comes to a stop and lands right on the roof, where she then sneaks into Natla's office and finds out that Pierre has gone to Greece, to what appears as a monastery, which is apparently on a lone spot, but also leads to an entryway to the tomb of Qualopec. So Laura makes her way through all that. Surviving tests to get keys to open the door that leads to possibly a submerged Colosseum. Fighting off creatures, and Pierre, who is somehow managing to catch up to her and sometimes get ahead of her. You have to basically shoot him all, shoot at him away multiple times. Go through the Colosseum. Then you end up in the palace of King Midas, which basically means, oh no, that's Minos, who was in Crete. But when you get there, I mean, there's even a statue of him which has the same capabilities that he apparently had. You have to find 3 lead bars to turn them to gold, use them to open the gate to the ancient cistern, manipulate the water levels in the cistern, work your way, gain keys to open gates to doors to where the entry to the actual tomb is. I mean, and you're finding crocodiles, lions, giant ass rats, gorillas, all throughout this. And eventually, of course, you make your way through, get to the tomb of Qualopec, make it to his resting spot, which, if you aren't careful, you end up fighting 2 rather nasty, what initially appear to be statues, but break free into Atlantean centaurs. Until you get in there, fight Pierre, wipe him out, get the second part of the ski on. There's 3 parts. And find in his tomb a, relief saying, here he lies, no children, survived the curse of the continent. And then Laura has a vision where the last one is. It's somewhere in Egypt, so she goes there. This is actually one of the first times I've seen levels overlap in this game. So as Laura is working her way through the city of Cameroon, I think it is Cameroon, getting these icons to be put around this smaller obelisk, and they're all around this giant obelisk. While dealing with panthers, more crocodiles, and Atlantean mummies. And some Atlanteans as well. And some that fly. And getting these items to open a doorway which leads to a giant subterranean, as best I think it's subterranean, Sphinx. Which I gotta say, this thing is a hallmark of this game. Of course, once you get through all that and get into the layer of the final Skyan piece, of course you have to fight Larson again, and he is definitely messed up due to all that. And of course, Laura leaves him sucking wind. He's dead in that part. And when Laura leaves the tomb with the last piece, at first, being blinded by light, she's not aware of who's approaching her, but then she's grabbed by behind by a big bloke. These two other punks, well, one's a punk, almost like a punk kid, and the other one's sort of like a cowboy. They take her weapons, and Natla is there. It's by this point that she figures Natla's really has, well, she's already suspected Natla's up to something, and so they take her weapon. She escapes, follows Natla to getting on board Natla's ship and following her to an island where Natla has a mine, and she's been working her way to Atlantis. So Laura first has to work through the mines, regain her weapons, which means taking out, well, first getting her pistols back and then taking out the cowboy, the skateboarding kid, and the big guy at the end. Get into Atlantis, which, again, this is a level, you have a little overlap. So Laura must make her way up this pyramid, which actually has, like, the floor, the bottom of it is sort of like lava, like it's like a volcano. And as you get up there, you meet more of these Atlantean things, including a copy of Laura, which you have to get past. But here's the kicker: if you shoot it, it shoots you. And while it can't die to bullets, you can. So you figure your way around that, get up to the final part, get to the room with the Skion, which is powering this ancient mechanism. Of course, once Laura goes to first grab it, she gets a vision of what happened. She finds out, if she hadn't figured out by now, thanks to a triple throne room, that Natla is the third ruler of Atlantis, and that she took actions to try and jumpstart evolution, of course, which was against the rule of three. So what they ended up doing was they imprisoned her in some sort of stasis, which the opening movie shows that this stasis had somehow ended up in what was New Mexico and got sort of opened by the atomic bomb testing. Well, once Laura goes to shoot to destroy the Skion, Natla sort of knocks her out and they land on this platform. Well, Laura lands on this platform, but Natla apparently falls to her doom. And so in the final level, you fight this big abomination. Manage to work your way over to the Skion, blow it up, work on escaping the pyramid, which eventually ends with a big boss fight with Natla, and showing she survived. She apparently had wings. And after you beat her once, you think that it's all over. Nope, she's got a second go, and she shoots at you, and you kill her, and you escape the pyramid by climbing up perilous pillars until you slide down out of it, thus ending Laura's first adventure. Then we have Laura's second adventure, where she's seeking the dagger of Xi'an. And it starts with going to the Great Wall of China. And I'm going to tell you, this is one of the harder first levels in games. You just go straight into you work your way into the wall, killing freaking spiders and making your way into it, only to have to run through a gauntlet to reach all the way down to where the dagger's supposed to be. Oh yeah, and you got this big chasm in there that at the bottom of which is two Tyrannosaurus Rexes. After you beat one and grab the secret that's down there, there's the second one. I'm like, where the frick were you hiding? Some people they say like, oh, they're walking single file. Yeah, and attack you one at a time when you can't see the second one. Anyhow, you get to the door and you find out that there is a bit of a cult type thing going on. That the people in this mob family, you know, the Bartolis, the head of the family wants to get this dagger Jean because he's heard the stories of it. And the opening movie actually shows that that one warrior was facing the dragon, and he managed to somehow be close enough that he could pull the damn dagger out, thus killing the dragon. So Laura finds out where and goes off to Venice, where she sneaks through Venice, shooting his henchmen and breaking into the his base of operations, which appears to be an old opera house. And after fighting your way through that, and manipulating things so you can advance, Laura comes face to face with a guy with two big guns. Two big guns, yes. And of course, she defeats him because she's badass that way. She then sneaks aboard a seaplane, which is heading out to a derelict ocean rig, or an ocean rig that's been taken over by Bartoli's people. You see, an item they're looking for to get access to the dagger, or to get into where the dagger is kept, or to get they need to get into the dagger. It was aboard a ship that sank. Apparently, the ship had one of Bartoli's people on it at the time. Of course, they couldn't get at it. So Laura works through the rig. Now, of course, she was caught off guard at this time, and so she is now weaponless. So she has to regain her weapons all this time and make her way to the diving area, where she also meets a monk, Brother Chen, of the Barkang Monastery. Of course, he's killed by one of Bartoli's goons, or Bartoli himself, and she dives down, catching a sub on its way down. And she's now got to work her way through the Mary Celeste, or not the Mary Celeste, the Maradoria, I think it is, which is not easy. I mean, first she's got to outswim a shark on a just on her holding her breath and get to start working through that area. I mean, parts of the ship are upside down, parts of them are right side up. There's sharks. She's got to make her way to where this item was kept, which has somehow managed to stay intact, and she's just got to find the key and avoid Bartoli's henchmen, some of which have flamethrowers, and we know how flammable ore is. And of course, once she gets that all together, she must now take this item up to the monastery and get in at the last item she needs to, hopefully beat Bartoli to the Dagger of Xian. Now this involves making her way around and, killing, goons, but leaving the monks alone, because the monks are going to help her fight the goons, believe it or not. That works out in her favor. Of course, then she goes into the deeper caverns and fighting Yetis and more Bartoli's goons, and eventually fighting this giant two-legged chicken type thing, which is the Guardian. And after she defeats that and makes her way out, she heads back to the Great Wall, opening the door and heading in and falling into a trap. So now she must go through the Temple of Xian to get back to where the dagger is. This was one of the hardest levels I ever played in this game because of the damn giant spiders that she has to, defeat and get around. By the time she gets through this whole massive level, she ends up getting there too late because he takes the dagger, stabs himself with it, and his most faithful followers take him into the next part. She falls in. It's a surreal environment called the Floating Islands and has some weird things going on in there. I mean, lava suspended on the ceiling in some parts, and jade warriors that, So she has to fight her way through all this, through some crazy puzzles, and eventually she comes face to face with the Bartoli, who is now transforming into a dragon. So you have to beat him, get the dagger out of him, which basically kills him in dragon form, and he's already, quote, dead in human form. And she basically takes the dagger back to her home, where we have one last fight with Bartoli's goons and the guy with the two guns. And she only has a shotgun and two med packs and her bathrobe. Of course, she fends them off, and we have another successful win. And then we move on to Tomb Raider 3. The first one that has actually multiple paths to take, because you can do 3 areas in any order. Now, Laura is on her way investigating another thing, a unique item of power that's in India. And after making her way through a jungle with quicksand and all these other nasty things, and monkeys that turn on her after the first level, and tigers, and giant mobile six-armed statues with swords. Laura is comes across this one guy who he escapes going downriver, and we find out he has this item, and he's gained some powers from it. And they've also driven him mad. So Laura makes her way down to where he's hiding, fights him off, defeats him, and when she leaves that temple, she meets a Dr. Willard, who is obviously he's up to something, but he wants to gather these. He wants her to gather these three other items. He knows where they're located, so she agrees to retrieve them. One is in actually Area 51 inside a spacecraft. So she has to obviously sneak into a military compound, which obviously doesn't go as planned, as they sort of catch her after she tries jumping the fence and it didn't go well, and she's without her weapons. And then she's working her way out of being captured, sneaking into another vehicle that takes her to Area 51, where she must now sneak around, use her wits, use her weapons, gain access to a UFO in a hangar, and then sneak into the UFO. And what happens? She manages to make her way inside and find the item. This is one of those weird ones because, the UFO, it's got the Gallifreyan technology because it's bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. I'm never sure how they pull those off. Anyhow, after that, she can head to the Southern Pacific area, where there is, of course, a cannibalistic tribe who are descended from probably some of these entities that these other explorers met years ago. And what happens is this. She finds her way, she gets through the village, gets across this large quicksand area, encounters dinosaurs in a crashed plane with some mercs. So if you don't attack them, they won't attack you. And you have to make your way down this, through this area, freeing a temple, finding dinosaurs and another Tyrannosaurus Rex. And once you get to this one temple is actually leads to a gorge that you have to go through, where you have to work your way through, down a rapid river, make sure you get to the end, open a whirlpool, and you got to do a lot of climbing on, monkey bar type stuff. And eventually, Laura gets to the Temple of Puna, and working her way through that level and defeating the ones that are in there, she eventually faces the Great Puna, who has powers, thanks to one of these meteorite parts. And of course, she's got to, be careful, dodge the attacks, and successfully defeat the guy, and win. Of course, then you're off to London, where the last item is held by a fashion mogul who's been alive for hundreds of years. Apparently, the artifact that she has kept her alive all this time, kept her looking young and beautiful. So Laura, of course, works through London, finds out some things, goes through an area where we find out that some people that she experimented on are also immortal, but have been seriously deformed. So she gets something to help them, makes her way, after going through the subways and up and through like a museum, and eventually into Sophia, that's her name's, lair, or her office. She tries to make a deal with Laura. Laura pursues her. She's blasting Laura. You gotta dodge the blast and eventually electrocute the woman. Then turn off the electricity so you can claim the prize and then head to Antarctica where Dr. Willard is doing his research. And you find out he is about as messed up as all the others after going through and finding some people who had mutated. Well, after that, he's gone mad since he wants all these relics and he wants to put them into the meteorite. So you're rushing after him, going through a mine like operation, maneuvering these, and surviving on these carts, these mine carts, also diving through subthermal, water that could induce hypothermia, I believe, if you swim in it too long. And trust me, part of it is a massive swim section in this cold water. And eventually you get through that and find this lost city, the city of Tinos. And while you go through it, you endure these trials of linked to each element and fighting these big, nasty mutations. You eventually make your way to the meteorite cavern, and, well, Willard's already done his thing, and he's mutated into this crazy spider-like creature, which in order to defeat, you have to blast him until he collapses, run in, take one of the artifacts out, do it again until the meteorite comes crashing back down, and then you can kill him, and then you escape. And that basically ends Laura's third adventure. So we then get to Laura's fourth adventure. The last revelation, which was supposed to be her last one, hence the name. With a new engine and everything. So, you learn a little bit of Laura's past. You get first open with her going to Cambodia with Werner von Croy, who was a friend of the family. And of course, you're, exploring the area. It's sort of like a tutorial. Then a little race to the final relic, the iris. Of course, Laura is one of those, she's being cautious, but Werner does not believe in superstition. Something bad happens. He gets caught, trapped. She escapes. Luckily, somehow he escapes too, using the relic. And we see years later in Egypt, Laura is going into a tomb and unknowingly releases Set. Werner is also after the similar relic. And he ends up getting possessed by Set. So as you're maneuvering through the areas, you head through and you basically kick butt and fighting off any of his minions. Find out he's been possessed by Set. And you've somehow triggered the end of the world. So Laura must work through areas, fighting monstrosities that some that can't be beaten for long, work her way through the deserts and the pyramids to a cavern where Set is to imprison him using the armor of Horus and the Ankh, and then climbing out and sealing him away. Of course, as you're making your last ditch escape from that, you run again into Von Croy, who's no longer possessed, trying to help her escape. But of course, as everything comes crashing down, he's like, nope. Uh, and then it's like he realizes now, it's like being possessed by Set sort of changed him for the better. And so he starts an excavation for Laura. They also, this is then when Chronicles comes in, because as people are mourning Laura, including her parents who disowned her, Winston and two others are sharing stories of Laura's adventures. Laura tells, the story goes like, first off, you get the story of how she found the Philosopher's Stone, which was found in a surreal section or a magical section of Rome after opening the gates. Of course, as she's going after it, we also find out that she was dealing with Larson and Pierre there. Of course, she beats them, and in one section it appears Pierre might have fallen to his death, but he didn't. But she's also finding things like a floating head with laser shooting eyes and giant statues. But eventually she gets to the Philosopher's Stone, retrieves it. Then you hear of another story, and the only thing I can figure is that Larson and Pierre both survived that encounter. Mainly due, I'm thinking, to the mystical nature of where they had gone to. I mean, gladiators, lions, and all that. But as they continue the stories. They tell of when she did a service and found the Spear of Destiny, which was also being basically she's with some Russians going after it. The mafia, um, the Russian mafia was going after it, and they had a Russian captain by sort of stuck in it. So Laura's basically sneaking through the base, getting on board the sub where she ends up getting caught. So she has to sneak through, recover her weapons, find a diving outfit where she finds the Spear of Destiny, but she's not foolish enough to use it. Well, once she gets back, and the mafioso sort of, grabs her and doesn't listen to her, he ends up causing massive damage to the ship, and everybody is basically, the ship is sinking. The Russian captain basically, he's going to go down with his ship, and he wants Laura to basically escape, let the damn thing go with him, I guess that's what happened. We then have the pastor that's there telling a story, which is set during Laura's youth, where there was this foul magic going on this one island, and he was going to stop it. She ended up going with, because she snuck along. And she does all this, and we find, this is without weapons. And eventually she runs through everything, avoiding creatures since she has no weapons. And eventually, gets the a book as well as, quote, freeing some creatures and all that, and catching this demon by using its name and thus being able to command it, and basically she saves the priest and all that. They go back, and then you get the final story in which she basically broke into Von Croy Industries to get the iris because, Werner's father was, I guess, exploiting it. And that was a trial in and of itself. I mean, the level had some bugs in it, but it was tricky. Now, after all these stories, you get an image. You get Werner. You get basically, as Werner's been trying to find her, and they managed to find her backpack. Now, this is where there's a bit of a gap. And the books that were released were supposed to bridge this gap. The first one was the Amulet of Power, to which Laura has escaped from under the tomb. Not necessarily in the same spot that they were digging, but everyone believes that she has the Amulet of Power. It's the only way that she could have survived as a woman. And so she meets others along her attempts to return to civilization. Some who are after her because they think she has this power, this amulet. Others who don't think she has the amulet but want to help protect her. And eventually, through exploration and encounters, I swear one of my favorites from that book was when they attacked her and these others. The one of the guys that was helping her, he hates, he loves horses, so he doesn't want to injure such a magnificent creature. Well, he ended up shooting a horse, and he was not too thrilled. So what he was going to do was this guy who was dying, that they ended up beating and all that. He basically took her. He was going to bury the guy facing the opposite direction of Mecca, which was a worse fate for anyone, for some of those people. If when they die, they be buried, you got to face Mecca, I believe. Well, as they go through all this, and Laura eventually does find where the amulet power is, but she doesn't take it. In fact, she doesn't even reveal where it is at. She just leaves it there, buries it, and so she moves on. Now, the second book, The Lost Cult, we find out someone from her past is helping on an expedition to find this lost cult. Well, actually, no, she's become part of it. This one is a very Lovecraftian story and gets set in the Pacific, where you have a cult that is very reminiscent of Lovecraft, and in fact, they don't necessarily hide it. She goes with them, she goes to find this stuff, and she finds this cult too. I'm not going to even try to pronounce it, but it's basically Cthulhu spelled backwards. And it even tries to get in her mind too, but she manages to, outlast. She does better than her protege, but in the end, it's all over for the protege and the people following the cult. They've gone mad, and Laura stops the rise of this old one. And then we get the third book, which is which is the Man of Bronze, in which this extraterrestrial entity known as the Man of Bronze, who's been pursuing another entity known as the Man of Silver to catch him, but he's been in bronze. He's been in pieces, so Laura must help reclaim those pieces. Of course, Mr. Silver doesn't want her to do that because he's too busy enjoying life on Earth. He's immortal, and this even takes her to this adventure to retrieve some of the pieces. She ends up going to Tunguska, which, if you don't know about that, that's where a massive fireball landed in the early 1900s. But she's getting this stuff. She even ends up caught by this Man of Silver. Not too thrilled that he actually had her out of her clothing. Luckily, he didn't take advantage of her. He's trying to convince her to not help the Man in Bronze, but she has this sense of right and wrong, and she could tell that this Silver Man is not right. He's bad, and that the Bronze Man is the good man, although he's emotionless, it seems. So eventually, she gets the parts back to the Man in Bronze, and even has managed to capture the Man of Silver. And of course, he takes the Man in Silver and leaves. And then we have the Angel of Darkness, where someone is trying to revive the Seraphim. And of course, once she gets, it starts with her basically on the run, and apparently she went to Werner von Croy, and there was some heated discussion. She didn't think he tried to save her. Which, when you see the man run away just as everything comes collapsing down, you gotta, that's a fair assumption. But then he ends up dead. And she picks up what he's been researching, although she is now the one suspected of his death, as well as anyone else that she manages to come in contact with to try and find out what's going on. At the same time, someone else is also on this case, a man named Trent, who also has some odd abilities. See, he's part of a group that has been trying to hunt down these Seraphim and the people trying to help them for a long time. In fact, he has the only weapon that can stop these Seraphim. So, Laura, while investigating and crossing paths with him, finding a one of the items that Werner was looking for underneath the Louvre in an archaeological dig, and then sneaks around, ends up finding, getting out and then moving to where the original another killing was, which is where this cabal has their base of operations, and sneaking into it. Again, crossing paths with Trent, and you get to actually play as Trent for a bit, fighting these things, defeating some of them. And eventually, you see how ruthless this guy is, and even find out he's been a pawn all this time by a real seraphim, or Nephilim. That's it. And of course, after defeating them and finding out that Trent managed to somehow survive his deadly battle, you're left on a cliffhanger of sorts. You know, this is where it managed to fall apart, and I think this was because the sixth game was not ready when it was released. It was not ready. It had bugs in it like all galore, and even some of them didn't get fixed. It was too rushed. Had they, taken time, I think they would have gotten it better. Overall, like if you stopped at the fifth game and even read the novel, like if you're a gamer, you'd love the original timeline. 1 through 5, even with 5's somewhat flaws, you'd enjoy it. If you have to play all the games, fine. But 6 is a rough note to end on. Now, if you have to read the books as well, I'd say read the books. They were great reads when I read them. And I remember certain details from each of those books. Now, I haven't read them in years. But this was a great timeline, which unfortunately had a bad ending with a cliffhanger at the end of the last game. But that's all you can say. I mean, that's how it is. But, if you're going to play the whole series, fine, play it. If you can't get access to the books, that's fine. You could probably read synopses of them online, or somebody might have put them online for free to share. Some people do that. Only die hard if you could play all 6 of the games and read all the books. Personally, I say you could leave the 6th one, but it's all up to the experience. But that's all I'm going to say about the whole Tomb Raider Core Designs timeline. After this, they rebooted the timeline, changed some things, and that's okay. And like I said, that's all I'm going to say about that. Take care all, and if you've listened this far, thank you very much. And bye.